thrilled. Oh, am I okay now? Am I okay now? I think I should be okay now. Yes, thank God. Okay. Greetings and welcome again to an unexpected episode of The Angry Astronaut, a live streaming episode where we're going to be talking a bit about what happened yesterday and what didn't happen yesterday. Once again, even though we have live chats who are participating, regrettably, because of my own technical restrictions, a lot of which is going to be taken care of after the 21st when I get paid again. I'm going to be rectifying a lot of that with new equipment. Presently, things are being handled by my moderators and transitioned over here. So keep your questions kind of, flowing, but not overwhelmingly so they're able to keep up. Chat amongst yourselves as much as you like. That's fine. But there's only so much that I can see, I guess, is the best way for me to put that. So all of that having been said, welcome for coming here. Thank you very much for doing so. And I wanted to open this up to as many people as possible, simply because there is so much to be dealt with. So what happened yesterday, so far from what I've been able to read, is initially there was an indication that there was something going on, and then we had what appeared to be a major failure with one of the engines. One of the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines that have a history for extreme reliability. All of these engines, to my understanding, have flown in space before, although they have been modified. So the thing of it is that as far as we know, all four engines were working well. All four engines were up and running at 109% was my understanding when we got this failure notification. And they shut down simply because of the notification, which was something the computers were saying was happened, but we didn't have any other confirmation that there was a problem. Of course, NASA is going over all of this with a fine-tooth comb to determine what was going on. But nevertheless, that's what we got going on right now. So in any event, this was not what everybody wanted, not at all. I wouldn't call it a colossal failure, but at the same time, this isn't like the situations that come up with SpaceX where, we have a couple of Raptors that have some issues, we swap them out, we try again, we have a new prototype, a new SN ready to go. If this one doesn't work out, if it doesn't work out with this core, then we are in deep trouble. The entire mission, the future of Artemis is at stake if this doesn't work out. So the whole NASA testing process is entirely different. So all of that having been said, I'd like to see what you guys' input is, what your questions are, and discuss where things go from here. Obviously, NASA's going over things, and, but how much time is that going to take? How much more money is that going to require? Are there any penalty clauses with any of the subcontracted manufacturers? Is Rocketdyne on the hook if this is a quality control issue? My understanding is that there isn't. That's the problem with these contracts. There doesn't seem to be anybody holding the feet to the fire, so to speak, if there are any serious issues that come up. Personally, I don't think this is an Aerojet Rocketdyne issue. I don't think the RS-25s went bad. These engines had performed extraordinarily well in space on a number of occasions. This is just a personal opinion, and I'm very interested to see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. I think it was a software issue. I don't think there was a problem with the equipment at all. But that's just my own personal opinion. All of these engines had been tested prior to what happened. So very interesting. Yeah, that's just it. Boeing software, look at the situation with the Starliner, 80 corrective issues, virtually all of them software related. I would not be at all surprised if we had that situation duplicated here. In the post test briefing, they called it a successful test. In my eyes, it was a failure. In my eyes, kind of a half failure, well, maybe three quarters failure, really. I was disappointed. Yeah, I mean, we've got some data to work with, but it didn't perform as it was supposed to at all. And that's a bad sign given the amount of time and the amount of money that's been invested in this already. And Orbital ATK did their own static fire of their boosters, and everything worked out perfectly. So it's really really unfortunate. So, in any event, we've got. I'm seeing all kinds of all kinds of things cropping by here. I'm hoping my moderators are catching some of this and are able to transition some of this information over to me. If not, I'm just going to move the camera closer to where I can see this a little bit better. If that's what's absolutely necessary to make sure that you guys get a chance, for everybody gets a chance to participate. So in any event, I don't have a great idea as to how much of this is you guys talking to each other. Let's just appreciate that it took SpaceX a day or so to replace two Raptors. I don't think we'll see that speed with SLS. Yes, I would agree with that. And I don't think we're going to be replacing any of these RS-25. I really don't. I don't think that any of the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines are going to get swapped out. I could be wrong on this, but I don't think any of the equipment failed. I really don't. What's the possibility the SLS is going to fly with the current engines, or they're going to swap some equipment? In my opinion, they're probably going to swap out some equipment, with fresh stuff, perhaps. But at the same time, they may go with what's been more thoroughly tested. It's a tough one. NASA edited out the controller audio to eliminate the confusion by the launch director on the steps being run. Did they perform a debrief? They certainly need to. Yeah, it really, all of us, well, a lot of us saw it, and really it seemed like that they couldn't get off the air fast enough. Once all of that went down and they said, oh, well, I'm sure we got some data. Okay, now let's talk really quick on all the exciting stuff that's going to be coming up. And now we're signing off. Bye bye. And that was pretty much it. And that was really unfortunate. That was very upsetting to me. Okay, Finn, bring. I'm trying to remember what is the plan once they run out of reconditioned shuttle engines, particularly as they have only one use. Our new engines lined up as the new moon base develops. Yes, as a matter of fact, new engines are being built by Aerojet Rocketdyne right now. They've already been paid for. Congress has approved the money for them, and they are making new engines at this moment at an incredibly high rate, by the high cost, by the way. Aerojet Rocketdyne, in my opinion, is really raking the American taxpayer over the coals on the cost of those engines. Just a personal opinion, but I'm an American taxpayer and I don't like the numbers I see. So, what can I say? Let's see. Is Boeing the main software and avionics provider? For the most part, yes. For the most part, they're handling at least the coordination of all of that. And they certainly are responsible for the vast majority of that part of it. So yeah, I mean, that's why, and it wasn't just me that was expecting this sort of thing. Scott Manley, I would say, was probably one of the biggest YouTube contributors, YouTube creators, who was talking about what happened with Starliner and how so much of their failures was due to software issues. And how everything that happened with Starliner manner we might expect happen on SLS, you know, it was prophetic, in my opinion, what he had to say. Now, I could be wrong. This could be just a failure on an engine. And that's it. And we just swap it out and do another test. That's entirely possible. How long do I think SLS will be in service for? Maybe 5 to 10 years. Depending on how long Congress is willing to pay for it, because I believe that's how long it's going to take before Starship will be human certified. I think I think that SLS will probably be going for the next 5 to 10 years, assuming that it's successful at all. I mean, there's so many things that could have run into issues. Boeing's gotten busted outsourcing $9 an hour programmers for the 737 Max. Do I think that's a factor here, and or the Starliner? And then there's a link source here. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say there's a good chance that I can't say that with absolute certainty, but at the same time, I think that Boeing has been doing their utmost to try to cut corners wherever possible, especially given that their feet have been held over the fire, given the cost of this project so far. It's been so ridiculously expensive already. It wouldn't surprise me if they are outsourcing inexpensive software subcontractors in order to try to provide that part of things. Yeah, like I say, it wouldn't surprise me. Did I do a video in Huntsville, Alabama? Yes, I did. I did indeed do a video in Huntsville, Alabama. For a while, I felt very sorry for those folks, and I still do, for the people who are actually doing the building, actually doing the work on this stuff. They have so much invested in this. I still feel bad for them. I still, want to see them succeed. I want to see the SLS fly. Some people have this, impression that I want to see the SLS blow up on the pad, so we go with the Starship. That could not be further from the truth. I want the SLS to succeed because for now, I think it's the fastest way to get us to the moon. I do not believe that the Starship will be human rated as quickly as the SLS could be. I emphasize could be. Depends on how many problems we have here. If it gets held up too long, then that's just a ton of wasted taxpayer money, which, by the way, I don't want to see that either. I don't want to see a ton of wasted taxpayer money. That would be awful. Hello, this is for, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce. I'm just do your last name. I'm Matthew, I think, Mathu. Hello, why is it taking NASA so long to get back to the moon? Well, that's because there's been no emphasis on getting back to the moon. Once the Apollo program was canceled, the emphasis went to low Earth orbit into the space shuttle. That's where Nixon decided that our emphasis was going to be a reusable vessel to take things into orbit, military stuff especially. Remember, that was the height of the Cold War. So that's where the emphasis went, was to low Earth orbit, reusability, and sadly, as many things as the shuttle accomplished, it failed to be an affordable, reusable ship. I loved it in so many ways, but it did not do what it was promised to do, which is very, very sad. So another question, what is the next step? How long to the next static fire? That's a good question. NASA takes a long, long, long time to do things. I think that they're going to need another one. Now, if they discover that this was, one engine that had a problem, then they just, you swap out the engine and then you go for it. That shouldn't take terribly long, a month or two, something along those lines. It takes only a week or two for SpaceX, but a month or two for NASA. If it's something more in depth, then we could be looking at 6 months. It could really delay the entire process. Right now, we're in the early stages. But, what is just disappointing about this whole thing is the fact that all of these engines had already been tested. NASA had been over and over and over this with a fine-tooth comb. It should have gone just as flawlessly as the orbital ATK solid rocket booster test. It should have gone the same way, but it didn't. And that's what's unfortunate here. Will this test cause the next administration to be given a different mandate? Will it expedite the project, be given a mandate on how best to sell off the assets? I have a feeling that there isn't going to be as much of a rush to get to the moon. At the same time, though, Biden's got his own legacy. I think he'd like to see us get to the moon by the end of his first term, and he is an old man. Who knows how long the guy's going to last? Maybe he would like to see us get back to the moon on his watch. I'd very much like to see that. So it's hard to say. By the way, I know we have lots of people watching. Thank you so much. Please like, please subscribe. And if you want to support this channel, there are many ways to do it. It's in the description of most of my videos. I didn't put it in the description of this one, but it's in the description of many others. Okay. Let's see here. What can be done about Boeing? Does NASA have any authority? The problem is Boeing has NASA over a barrel. They really do, because they have control of this project. One thing that could be done is to outsource an oversight company of some kind, bring in another company to oversee the project and give them some authority. That might be one way to deal with it. To try, because that's been done in the past. When projects have been hung up, you bring in, outsourced issues and that sort. You outsource another company to oversee the issues, to examine them, that sort of thing. But it would, that has the potential of holding things up too, because they would have to get familiar with it. Unless maybe if you get somebody like ULA, perhaps, of course, there's going to be a lot of potential old boys network stuff going on there, because ULA and Boeing are, spinoffs of each other. But ULA has a very, very different vision now than Boeing does. So it's hard to say. What would be the best alternative to Boeing, in my opinion? Right now, geez, as far as NASA is concerned, I would say, that they pretty much need to push forward with what they've got. However, we need to keep in mind that the Orion is ready to go. So if we could find a way to get the Orion, and the IC, and and everything that goes with the Orion service module, etc., at least into orbit, perhaps refuel it in orbit, and then send it on the way to the gateway. There's a lot of possibilities there, but it would require a great deal of work to make any rocket do that, whether that be the Falcon Heavy, which has fairing restrictions. The Falcon Heavy needs to have an improved fairing before it could possibly carry anything as large as the Orion. You also have the Vulcan. The Vulcan might be able to get the Orion at least into low Earth orbit, where perhaps it could be refueled and then, get the rest of the way to the gateway. There's some options there, but all of those things are going to take a lot of time and a lot of engineering, and really should be, a last resort kind of situation. There's a deadline for Stennis to ship out the booster to the Cape. If I remember right, it's around March or April. If they drag their feet too long, we're going to see the SLS maiden launch slip once again. Yeah. And there's a strong possibility that that's going to happen. Very, very unfortunate. So, yeah, what has happened here has the potential, I would need to emphasize, of pushing us back again. And every time Artemis gets pushed back, the more money that gets flushed into this, black hole, the more Congress is going to look at it. And we need to remember something else here. The advocates for exploring space, a lot of its advocates were also advocates, and I don't care what you think about this politically, we're also advocates for standing up and opposing Biden taking over until there was another audit of the election. They're not all the same people, but some of them were the same people. Now, does that mean that the new people in power, the Democrats, are going to have control of the Senate, the House, everything? Are they no longer going to listen to these people because of what they did and because of what happened at the Capitol? Could get really complicated, could get really unfortunate. And guess who didn't do that, by the way? Well, I'm not going to bring him up by name, but he's a certain senator in Alabama that a lot of us love to hate, but he did not stand up to oppose Biden transitioning into the White House. And in my opinion, I think he played a pretty intelligent political game by doing that. So the biggest advocate for SLS, anyway, has kind of kept his hands clean of that whole situation. So that is also something to consider. And by the way, that's not just my opinion. I read an article about that one. If I talked about nuclear saltwater rockets, I have not, and I really would like to. And my opinion on them is I think that anything that is looking at getting us to Mars faster is something that we should be seriously looking at. But nevertheless, until I seriously research it, and I don't release a video on something until I've researched the hell out of it. And I've gotten help, by the way, from others. I have nuclear physicists and others who are supporters of mine who act as advisors, give me information about this stuff. I make sure they fact check me before I release my information, especially in the last several months. Thank God for these people because they know way more than I do. I definitely will do a video about nuclear saltwater rockets. Astronaut Rob Coolin, who declined to command the Artemis, is he vindicated by this test? That's a hard one to say. I would say that nothing has been definitely determined by this test yet. We have yet to see. What really sucks, what really frustrates me is the fact that we have a ship ready to go to the moon. We have the Orion, which is 100% ready at this point, and it's got no rocket to take it. And that's just frustrating as hell. It's almost the reverse of the Apollo. The Apollo had the issues with the service module and that sort of thing. As a matter of fact, the first orbital flight of the moon was done without the service module. It was done with only the command module, which means that if the Apollo 13 emergency had happened on that mission, all of those astronauts would have been dead. That's the kind of chances that NASA took in those days, basically to beat the Russians. That was their main motivation. Okay, what is the chance that SLS will be funded to make it reusable? Not much. I think that it can be, certain aspects of it can be made reusable. I think that what ULA is doing with their engines could be done with the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines, and that is to say, you send them up, and then the engines detach, come back down on a inflatable parafoil heat shield, and the engines come back down to Earth, and you reuse the engines that way. The RS-25s have proven to be extremely good engines to reuse, and they're so stinking expensive. My God, those things are expensive. So just reusing those engines alone would save us a ton of money. So that's one possibility. But is it going to happen? Yeah, unfortunately. Oh, hey, Grug, how's it going? Thanks for showing up. What do I think NASA's future role in spaceflight will be? I think NASA's going to have a huge role in spaceflight, but it's a matter of who they contract. That's the big thing. I hope that this teaches them a lesson between Starliner and the SLS that they've got to cut Boeing loose. They've got to cut the old guard loose and say, get out of here, guys. We need to go with people who have a new vision, who have a more efficient, cost effective vision of getting to space. I think NASA has an important, role to play. I just think they need to pick better contractors. And in their defense, they didn't have a good contractor to pick back when they first started this thing. So, I mean, SpaceX was, wasn't even really getting going at this point. So, lots happened since then. Okay, Tyler, well, here's the concept. How many licks does it take to get to the aluminum chilled center of an SLS first stage? Okay. Okay, let's see here. Ricker, I would surmise 4 mothball shuttle engines simultaneously lighting would produce shock pulses and vibration stresses to mount a thrust pack structure welds and hydraulic or electrical control harnesses to a full up rocket. That would differ much from an engine test stand. In full range engine throttle could reduce, say, the detrimental shock forces. SpaceX seems to understand this with their ability to hover a Starship at 15,000 feet. Very, very interesting observation. Yeah, that's very interesting. Those are really powerful engines, by the way. They're huge engines. I don't know if you've ever seen an RS-25 in person, but those things are utterly gigantic compared to everything else that just about anybody else uses. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. RS-25, how expensive are we talking? Oh, boy, I think the last time I looked at it, it was, I would have to look it up again. I'm thinking about is it 100 million an engine? Just a second. I can find this out real quick because it wasn't that long ago that I looked it up. Um, I'll be able to find this out for you real quick because I think that is a very important question. Yeah, it was. They actually had to defend their engine contract costs. I read about this one in Space News, by the way, which I'm a big fan of. I think they provide more in-depth stuff than space.com. $1.79 billion to produce 18 RS-25. So I wasn't too far off. Almost $100 million per engine. So yeah, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Um, do I like the Vulcan Centaur? Yes, I do like the Vulcan Centaur. I don't have the same opinion of ULA that I have of some other of the, traditional companies. I think ULA is, has recognized the threat that SpaceX represents to their future business. And I think that they are trying to adapt. They're making an effort to adapt. They're starting to embrace reusability. The Vulcan Centaur is ultimately going to be a version of, rather an example of reusability. Not yet, obviously, but not only are they going to reuse the main engines, they're also going to reuse the second stage as sort of a space tug in to travel between here and the moon. And that's a really cool concept. So I think that that's their long-term objectives. I find that to be very innovative, and I do like it very much so. SLS with Raptor engines instead of RS-25s, you'd need a whole lot of Raptor engines, let me tell you. The thrust on those RS-25s are incredible. But at the same time, yeah, it would also take a lot of redesign, of course, as well. I don't think the problem, well, expense is a problem with the RS-25. Look how much money you would save if those things weren't burning up in the atmosphere. $100 million an engine lost with each one of those burned up. If we could find a way to save those engines in the same way that ULA is saving their engines, Look how much money we would save on SLS. And I don't think any effort is being made to do that whatsoever. Instead of adding NTR to Starship, why not have a Starship dock with an NTR space tug? I actually think that's a good idea. I like that idea a lot. That's yeah, definitely a good concept. It adds some complexity. Obviously, you've got to get the space tug into orbit first, and then dock and undock and that sort of thing. When the Starship lands at Mars and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think that that is a pretty good idea. And it was I kind of vaguely referred to that in my most recent episode, but I should have been more explicit. I think the role of NASA is going to be research and exploration. In my opinion, the SLS is going to be the last rocket designed by NASA. I agree. I think that I do think, however, that NASA may use other people's rockets. But I'm see some super chats, by the way, going by here too. If anybody can catch those, thank you so much for those. By the way, I really do appreciate. If any of my moderators can catch those real quick, that would be really nice. But yeah, that would be. I'd say that they're not going to design a rocket, but I think they will use rockets for their future purposes. Kind of like maybe they're going to use a Falcon Heavy for the Europa Clipper. They're definitely going to use a Falcon Heavy to go to 16 Psyche, that extremely valuable asteroid in the asteroid belt. I think that needs to be the model that they use in the future, and they are. They are kind of. They're just sort of. They have this SLS monkey on their back to get to the moon. Who makes the engine so expensive? Why use ancient engines? Or what makes the engine so expensive? They're defending it, but I just think they're full of it. I don't think the RS-25s have to be that expensive. I think that they're just taking advantage of government money. I mean, there are so many other companies for military, whatever you want to talk about, tanks, aircraft, toilet seats, whatever. They charge the government insane amounts of money for what shouldn't cost nearly as much. I don't think the RS-25 should run that much. But if it's going to, then we should try to save them and reuse them. They caught a flash in the protective thermal blanket on the engine. Cause and significance remains to be determined, whatever the hell that means. Yes, that's true. That they did mention that. Of course, they have no idea what that means. And also, as near as they could tell, the engines were still running fine. So it's hard to say. The future is gonna. Hopefully, we find the problem quick, and the problem isn't something that requires any sort of significant changes, significant modifications, and then we can do another test. That is my hope. We shall see. But yeah, they did mention that they saw that, but it may not have any significance at all, by the way. Who knows? Once again, my opinion is that there is nothing wrong with the equipment. There is something wrong with the software, and there was a glitch. Just as there was a ton of glitches on the Starliner, there was a glitch on this. That's my opinion, but we'll see if I'm right. I'll be very interested to see what happened. You think it's a good thing that Rocketdyne got bought? Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Chris. Really appreciate that. But from Ernie, that remains to be seen. If Rocketdyne can start producing stuff for more competitive prices, then yes, it's a good thing that they got bought. I think they provide good quality stuff, but I think that they're overcharging for what they provide. Finding dinosaur DNA on the moon via panspermia. I don't know about dinosaur DNA, but I think that we're going to find life on Mars in the concept of panspermia. Don't want to talk too much about that. It's a little off topic, but I've released a lot of videos on that, and I've got I interviewed a fellow who's extremely well qualified to answer those questions, and he certainly provided a lot of information in that video. It's a two-parter, by the way, with my interview. Sure, they will use rockets built by private companies. Yeah, I mean that's just pretty much it. They'll have a project. They'll bid out the project, and hopefully they make better decisions in the future. And they put out some demands, some requirements. Eric Space, hello, shows lots of tests with higher failure rate like SpaceX is preferred to a few tests where everything needs to go right. That's a very good point, where things have been optimized by simulations for months and yet doesn't work in flight. That's a very good point. Yep, that model, it seems to be holding up. That seems to be the way to do things. So in any event, unfortunately, we're kind of stuck. RS-25, only slightly more powerful than the Raptors. 5 Raptors could 100% do the job. They just aren't proven like the RS-25s. Interesting point. Bryden Jimstein. I do appreciate that contribution. Perhaps they could, but once again, are the Raptors? They aren't proven yet. They really aren't. We're having to swap them out and stuff. They're new engines. That's the whole reason we're waiting on SL9 is because of the fact that Raptors are new and we're having some issues with them, I think. And so I think we'll resolve them, but they're very new, very unproven. Whereas these RS-25s that we were using in this particular test, as I said before, they've all been to space multiple times. So a pretty well that's why I just don't think that any of those engines failed. I just don't. But once again, super chat. Hello, Mr. Pete Channel needs 900 subbies. Okay, well, Mr. Pete Channel needs 900 subbies. Thanks. Will anybody ever use the Aerojet Rocketdyne AR1? Good question. I don't know. I would say that the 10, the RS-10 is going to, if I'm remembering correctly, for that. That obviously is going to be used in the upper stage of the, or is it the 5? Well, what's wrong with my brain today? But in any event, the Rocketdyne engine, they are going to be using those in the upper stage of the Vulcan Centaur, which I think is a very good idea because they run on liquid hydrogen. And there's a lot of liquid hydrogen on the moon and not much in the way of methane on the moon, at least as far as we can tell. Org Borg, thank you so much. A super chat from Org Borg. Really do appreciate that. And Robert White, a super chat. Wow, thank you guys. Appreciate you supporting this channel. Will progress by China get more money from Congress, or will they hedge their bets with Elon? This test is also political in that case. Yeah, I would say that what the Chinese are doing, they've got to take that seriously. The Long March 9, I was just reading about that, and wow, they're making progress with that, rapid progress. And we need to take that very seriously. Just to give you another example of what China is capable of, they've built a larger highway system since the 1980s when they had no highways. Now they have more miles of highway than any country on the planet. What that country is capable of is incredible. And to ignore them is a bad idea. Oh, by the way, we've got a new coffee mug, the 40K coffee mug, the Boeing destruction coffee mug. Just got it today, actually. It was delivered to a different location. It was dropped off to me today. So anyway, that's what you'll be seeing a lot of, at least for now. Okay, Stephen Porter, do I think that Starship will supersize in length and width when fully developed? I think that there will be eventually a supersized Starship, but I think that we're going to do a lot of stuff initially with the regular Starship. 100 tons in the fairing is tremendous compared to what we currently can put up. So I think that we're going to get a lot of use out of the Starship as it is before we supersize it. But then again, if we want to build a nuclear Starship, yeah, we may have to do that. Who am I? Alexander Dowding says, "Who am I hoping to do an interview with next, and when can we expect it?" That's a very good question. I've got some folks who are known to Dr. Levin, and I have a good rapport at this point. We talk to each other with some regularity, and he knows a lot of people who are in the whole alien life field. However, I released a few videos on those. They weren't terribly popular, so I'm kind of looking elsewhere. I did call up the Gateway Foundation to see if they wanted to do an interview. However, I did tell them that I was going to be asking tough questions, and they didn't return my call. So we'll see. I don't know. I would love to see if they can answer the questions that I have for them. So let's just say I've got a lot of irons in the fire. And I've got a very big fish on the line as well. It's just a matter of getting on his calendar, but they approached me, not me approaching them. I'm not going to say who, but it's a big fish. We'll put it that way. So there's a lot of possibilities. That's all I can say. Why is the SLS hot fire so long compared to SpaceX static fires? NASA really needs to test the full extent of the RS-25's capabilities. They really have to see how long, and also, power up, power down, do all of the different things that they intend to do during a full-fledged launch. SpaceX can afford to just do a static fire to make sure the engines are actually going to work and then send it up. And if the prototype explodes or something along those lines, boy, well, that was a bummer. But we don't mind having unscheduled disassemblies. Let's just go ahead and do another one. NASA can't afford to do that, so they've really got to have the full-fledged, simulated test of the engines for the full extent of the launch. Chris, thank you very much, Chris Moole, for your super chat. I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much. When you're trying to have 1.4 billion people in your country, lots of things are possible. Yes, that's very true, and something that we absolutely need to be keeping in mind. What could possibly be the benefit of SLS in our time? The benefit of SLS is to get us to the moon by 2024 or 2025. I do not believe that the Starship, and I could be wrong, Elon could prove me wrong on this. I don't think the Starship is going to be able to get human beings to the moon in that time frame, at least not safely enough to where NASA is going to put their astronauts on the ship. And if they don't put their astronauts on the ship, that means SpaceX has to come up with their own astronaut training program from scratch, etc., or have somebody else do it. I don't expect the Starship to be human rated by 2024 or 2025. So I do think the SLS can get us to the moon. And if it does, if it gets us to the moon, or even if we just orbit the moon, our Artemis 1, if we send, a vessel around the moon and we put a lot of publicity behind that, that can make people very excited about the future of space flight. It can get the public caring about space flight again. So that could change a lot. Soaring Black, or that, wait, sorry, that was from Soaring Blackbird, by the way. Wouldn't it be best if Starship refueled in Mars orbit? Yes, I have said that many times. Mr. P Channel needs 900 subbies. That's the name of his tag. That's fine. I've got no problem promoting you. You're here, whatever. Yeah, I do believe that refueling it in Mars orbit before it goes down is the best way to handle that. I am a big believer in the whole concept of turning Phobos into a refueling station. I think that makes the whole thing safer. But it makes things a lot more complicated too. So that's a tough one. Psychedelic manic incarnations. How far away from Artemis are we? I hope that we're about a year away, at least in terms of Artemis 1, sending Artemis 1 to orbit the moon. I hope we're about a year away. If you listen to NASA, we're about 10 months away. So I would say At best, we're a year away. So do you think that Boeing is running some sort of racket, says Sigmund? I don't think so. I think that they're just taking advantage of government money the way everybody, all of these old boy companies do. I don't think they're trying to design something that's never going to work just to get money, because eventually Congress is going to catch on to that and they're going to shut them down. And then they may not do another contract with them in the future. I think that we just have a company that's really struggling, and starting to fold under their own weight, under their own, antiquated methods. They're just behind the times. And we're suffering as a result. The space program is suffering as a result. Unless they use the Crew Dragon and dock with the Starship and then go to the Gateway, they could do that. Yes, that is a possibility. And honestly, I think NASA should be looking more seriously at that. So yeah, that it would be one way of accomplishing that. So yeah. And if SLS doesn't get, on the ball really soon, I think that that is definitely something that they should be looking at. So with all the seriousness that they can. But once again, there are a number of things that Starship needs to do before it's going to be able to even get to the Gateway. It has to achieve orbit, which means we need to make sure that the Super Heavy is completely, completely reliable. We haven't even tested one Super Heavy yet. And then we have to make sure that the stacked arrangement between the two is going to be viable. And then we need to be able to refuel it. We need to make sure that that's going to work, especially, in a prompt method. So there's a lot of hurdles yet to jump over. Whereas in theory, the SLS can make it all the way around the moon in the next 12 months. I would say it's going to be difficult to get the Starship to orbit in 12 months. Whereas I think the SLS, in theory, can get all the way around the moon in 12 months and all the way back, do an unmanned test as they're planning to do. Okay. Wow. A very nice super chat from Garden Maddox. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the compliment. And yes, I do my best to keep my topics as varied as possible. Because there's a lot about space, all of which is very fascinating. And I love to make sure that, once I learn something new, I want to share it with everybody else. So thank you so much for that. Do I plan to interview Elon Musk one day? I would love to, but I don't know if Elon is, the problem is Elon's not an easy guy to interview. I would have to make inroads. That would be very difficult to make. I'd love to someday. I really would. I'd have a lot of questions to ask him, a lot of questions that other folks haven't asked him. So maybe he may not like that, and he'd probably want all the questions filtered, that sort of thing. So I don't know. It just seems every time he does get interviewed, it's all incredibly, not to say that I don't have a problem with Elon Musk, by the way, at all. I think that he is leading a fantastic charge towards an amazing future. But at the same time, every interview I've seen with him doesn't ask these kinds of questions, and it makes me wonder whether or not these sorts of questions are permitted. So I don't know. I really don't know about that one. But that's all. Would I like to interview him? Hell yeah, absolutely. But will I interview him? Don't know. Don't know about that one. Is there info about, especially when I have videos titled Starship Suicide Dive? That might make them concerned about me interviewing him. I have to admit, if I was one of his representatives, I'd be hesitant to do an interview with me. Okay, is there info about when they're conducting another Green Run test or not? No, there isn't. If everything goes very smoothly, we could have another Green Run test in 30 days or so. If it's not so smooth, then it could take longer, but there will be another test. I don't see how we can avoid it. There has to be another test. SpaceX is not all physical engine tests. SpaceX has also been immersed in more successful, more modern, more rapid turnaround on technical engine development. I agree with all of this. Flame front borne propagation solutions, because their ability to leverage low-cost graphics card, multiprocessor, computer engine solutions, so many things. You're right. SpaceX has been on the bleeding edge of making space available to everybody. I have the greatest respect for them, the greatest respect. The only reason I said the things that I said was because, am I going to ask the same questions that everybody else has asked? No, I'm going to ask other kinds of questions. So, that's the sort of thing that might or might not work out depending on the circumstances. Oh, what a dry mouth I have. Another super chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Alexander Dowding. And yes, I will stay angry about space. By the way, lots of people watching. Thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. We're still going, by the way. We still got time because obviously we still have a lot of things to discuss. What does an SLS funeral look like? Says Andrew Paffreeman. I would say that they're going to put SLS in a grave only when that thing blows up. If it blows up on takeoff or something during an unmanned test, dear God, I hope that that's what would happen. Then that's when they put it in a grave. That's when they decide that they've invested too much money in something that's too unreliable. And let's hope that none of that happens. Now, in the future, once Starship proves itself as being a reliable and solid platform to send humans into space, then that's going to put SLS into a grave too. There's no reason to keep SLS anymore once you have a functional human-rated Starship. Could the Dragon capsule be updated for sending humans to the moon and send the Starship separately for cargo only initially? There has been, Phil James, there's been a lot of discussion of that, in which case you would send the Crew Dragon to dock with the Lunar Gateway, which it's kind of similar to the ISS, so why not? And then have the human landing system, which I hope is going to be Dynetics. As you know, anybody who's watched my channel, you know that I'm a Dynetics guy when it comes to the human landing system setup. And then so you send the astronauts down on that. The Crew Dragon, at least as it is right now, and it would take a lot of modifications, is incapable of landing on the moon and then taking off and going back to the gateway. But it could get to the gateway. So yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. And yeah, it could go wrong. What had gone wrong with the SLS test? Okay, Dan Steele, I guess you've tuned in a little bit later. But what had gone wrong is initially there was a flaw detected on one of the engines, and then a major flaw had developed, at least according to the software. However, the engines were functioning at 109% power, seemed to be going very well, and they did a shutdown anyway because of what the software was telling them. But no real proof of anything actually going wrong, which is, again, why I think it was software. Okay, let's see. Shreyans Magnum. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing names, I'm sure. Do you think Skylon could store oxygen from the atmosphere on its way up instead of just air breathing until Mach 5? I'm not going to comment on Skylon until I do a video about them. And I am going to do a video about them very soon. So once again, I really want to research these things very thoroughly before I do a video and before I really comment about it. Sovereign Soul, could I give an example of a question I would ask Elon Musk? Yes. Why do you think that your landing procedure is viable? How are you going to make the Starship land on Mars safely? Given that so far we've seen the Starship come down at a speed that is at terminal velocity on Earth, how are you going to land this thing on Mars in an atmosphere 1% as dense as ours? How are you going to get enough drag on the Starship in order to land successfully using that flip turn maneuver of yours without putting so many G's on the passengers that you're going to kill them? How do you intend to avoid that? That's a question that he may or may not want to answer. He may have some sort of proprietary solution that he doesn't want to reveal yet. Who knows? But that would be, one question that I might ask him. Another question would be, how are you going to handle the situation with a lunar starship and sending cargoes to the moon when creating in situ methalox fuel on the moon is very, very difficult. There's very little carbon and there's virtually no methane. How are you going to do that? How are you going to send a lunar starship all the way to the lunar surface and all the way back? That's going to be a very, very difficult thing, and nobody's asked that question yet. And that's a problem that exists nowhere else, by the way. You could send the Starship out to asteroids, no sweat, because C-class asteroids have plenty of water. You can make in situ fuel for the Starship there, but you can't do it on the moon. So what's your solution for that, Mr. Musk? Those sorts of questions. Never heard anybody ask that. Um, and I don't really want to get confrontational with the fellow. He's one of the richest people on the planet. So in any event, and I am the kind of person who does ask tough questions if I feel that there are tough questions that need to be asked. So in any event, it's hard to say. With the people I've interviewed so far, they've answered a lot of the questions that I would have asked them before I even asked them. So that was a tough one. But one thing with Dynetics, for example, that I asked is if, it's been suggested that the Lunar Starship could act as a refueling depot for your human landing system. And by the way, Dynetics is not a huge fan of SpaceX. They prefer to collaborate with ULA. Would you be willing to do that? Well, they were willing to answer that tough question, and I was happy that they did. And they answered in the affirmative, by the way, that they would be willing to work with SpaceX. Vulcan Centaur can deliver the Alpaca lander to the Gateway, work and go back and forth, be maintained and refueled. That is a good point. It's something I didn't think about, but you're right, Ouija that could be done. John Caldwell, question: what about the new Glenn? Do I think it will ever launch and be viable competition to the SLS and Starship? It'd be a competition to the SLS. Yes, I think it will launch 2022 at the earliest. But yes, I think it will be viable competition to the SLS. Absolutely. Anything reusable will be. The Starship, no way. It doesn't have the cargo capacity. So I don't believe that it's going to be viable competition to the Starship. So it'll be kind of a race to see who can get their ship functional in the first place. Sonia Smith, hello Sonia. How viable are nuclear powered engines for space travel to the moon and Mars? To the moon, not so necessary. Simply because we can accomplish, but maybe it might be a good idea. But yes, very viable. There are a number. I just released a video about the subject. They're looking for a full-fledged test of a nuclear thermal engine in 2027. That's a functional test in space of a half-size version, but actually having it ready by the 2030s. So yeah, I think it's very viable, at least nuclear thermal. There are 3 companies now working on it, and I think that there's a very good chance that we're going to have nuclear thermal available to us in the near future. And I think that's NASA's plan, personally, for getting to Mars. I think, that they intend to use nuclear thermal to get to Mars, that they don't want to use chemical rockets and they don't want to take a huge amount of time to get there. Super chat, thank you so much from Jackie Pont. Thank you. I appreciate that for your compliment. One purpose, Starship for all purpose couldn't imagine. SLS is done for one purpose, Starship for all the purpose couldn't imagine at the moment. Okay. I'd be interested to hear some elaboration. Elia Vesci, thank you for the super chat, by the way. How will they stack Starship on top of the booster? That's a good question. We don't know that one yet. I'm not sure if they're 100% on that yet. There's still a lot of questions. We have a lot of steps to go. We have to check the super heavy first. We have to actually experiment with that and do some test launches with that and re-land it. All of that needs to be accomplished before we even start looking at stacking. Do you think we could use the ISS to test skyhooks before the deorbit? Interesting idea, but once again, skyhooks, they've got so many problems with all the space junk and other issues with them on Earth. I love skyhooks and space elevators on Mars and the moon. So much more problematic here on Earth. Maybe to test it in the upper atmosphere, kind of a hard one. Did I see the reporter asking questions wearing the Blue Origin cap? Yeah, I was wondering what sort of agenda he had, but yeah, I did notice that. That was kind of funny. Salbox Jare, I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess that one up terribly. Do I think two propulsion systems can fit on the Starship, a Raptor for landing and nuclear for interplanetary? Yes, I do. I think it's possible. I think that of course, I'm no engineer, but at the same time, nuclear reactors are getting smaller and smaller all the time. So I think it can be done. You might need to make the Starship a little bigger, a little longer, more supersized, hard to say, but nevertheless, I think that it is possible. Or if not, the other suggestion made of a nuclear thermal tug to push it. I think that that's a really good idea too, and then use the Raptors for landing. Another question, accelerating Starship for longer and refueling before retarding on the way to Mars, fully possible. Some fairings are possible to reuse as heat shields so we can burn engines harder to slow down. Very interesting. Well, on the way to Mars. Yeah, I mean, it's something that ULA has actually talked about. They're looking at using Vulcans to do orbital refueling and that sort of thing. They're once again, like I said before about ULA, they've caught up on what SpaceX is doing. They're wise to it and they're making some adaptations themselves. Lucas Johnson, what's the chance of SpaceX and Rolls-Royce combining? I'd love to see it happen. What I found to be interesting is the press rollout about British astronauts going to Mars in 90 days. How the hell are they going to do that without a ship? Well, they might have a ship. The Starship would be a perfect thing for them. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, what's the chances of it? Hard to say. That I wish I was a fly on the wall at both corporations to see if they're thinking about it. But it makes perfect sense. Great Britain is not wedded to the SLS. They're not wedded to Boeing. So why not go with something like that? I think that would be an amazing thing. They got the money. Great Britain is a very wealthy country. Why wouldn't they try something like that? But will it? That's a hard one. Noam Bahar, what's your opinion of Catch the Super Heavy booster with the grid fins? Well, that's what they want to do. I think that makes things even harder. But at the same time, I think that that may be what has to be done. And SpaceX has demonstrated that they're very good at precision landings when they're doing powered landings, or even the whole belly flop thing was very precise. So they have a lot of precision. So therefore, going in with the grid fins, maybe so. I would say that it's not a bad idea to be going that route. Is Virgin supposed to launch today at this exact time? Wow, Safir Gohar, I don't know. I bet I ought to check that. I hope they are. Was it a Washington Post reporter? They're both owned by Bezos. That would be interesting indeed. We have a super chat, German Deutsche Marks, super chat from Puerto Alto, super chat. Thank you. Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very, very generous of you. Ella Vesci. Is it possible to brake using engines and reverting the ship before entering orbit to slow down? Don't they enter the atmosphere? Yes. I'd say that that's the best way to do it, but you need the fuel to do it. And that's where nuclear thermal comes in as being better. You use less fuel accelerating if you have some in reserve to decelerate. Now, you can also decelerate by a process called aerobraking, but that involves using the upper atmosphere, slowing down some, going all the way back around, aerobraking again. It adds weeks to the travel time. So yeah, I would say that the more that we can reduce the speed, to where maybe even orbital Mars orbit becomes possible, is a much better scenario. And once again, another question I would ask Elon: what are you going to do if your Starship is plunging towards Mars and there's a planet-wide dust storm and you can't slow down enough to go into orbit? What are you going to do? So, it's a tough one. Maybe do, a free return trajectory. But if so, are you going to have enough supplies for 6 months coming back? You know, those are the kinds of questions I might ask. Maybe Brexit was a blessing in disguise when it comes to spaceflight. Well, I got no opinions on Brexit one way or the other. I think there's positives and negatives either way, but it does make Great Britain less answerable to Europe on what they want to do. So that's just something that happened as a result. So who knows? Who knows what's going to come out of that? Ms. Tree, SpaceX's sea recovery, rocket fairing recovery ship, still sweating huge bullets ever since Elon's proposal a few weeks to eliminate the super heavy landing legs. Yeah. That's all very it's I have to admit, he's pushing things to the limit. He really is. But that is the nature of the guy. That is what he does. He pushes things until they break. That's always been his standard. And so far it works pretty well. William Gorham: the nuclear tug would be a nice option, could be launched in pieces by Raptor-driven Starship. Once in space, the refueling would simply be hydrogen and nuclear fuel needed every 25 to 35 years. It's only 5 minutes to the Virgin launch. Okay, guys, I hate to shut things off, but I was actually planning on stopping things soon, but I actually want to check this out. I would like to see if Virgin Orbit is successful here. So I'm if that is indeed who's going, I think that's who's going. So in any event, sorry guys, I will have other opportunities to answer your questions in the future. This was fantastic. Let's hope that whatever happened with SLS was not too serious. So until SLS either performs as promised or we get rid of this overpriced thing and replace it with something better, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.